I'm Rich Groller. I'm your moderator for this panel. Welcome to LibertyCon 33 and the panel Crafting a Realistic Totalitarian Society. Our panelists this evening or this afternoon, I should say, are Sarah Hoyt, Monalisa Foster, and Marina Fontaine. So I'd like to go around clockwise. Sarah, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Sarah Hoyt, and I'm a writer. I've tried to give it up, but it's like a cat. It keeps finding me again. I have written probably 36 books. Don't make me count. Every time I count, I forget one of the series. Actually, the cover I sent for this panel is not a novel for a totalitarian society. It's just something that's supposed to be on pre-order now, and of course it isn't yet, because I've been doing other stuff. The totalitarian society, other than real life, I've spent the most time in, has been in the dark ship world, which I am reissuing, but they're not quite up yet. And that's about it. Oh, and I have a cat, and he's fluffy, but he's not all white. So you guys are safe. There probably isn't a piranha tank around here somewhere. So that's it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Monalisa?
Hi, I'm Monalisa Foster. I am also a writer. And despite being told recently to hang up my pen, I am still writing and intend to keep on writing. I have one novel in a space opera with romance out. That's the start of a series, along with several novellas in that world. And I have a bunch of short stories out. And I don't know how I got into short stories because I don't generally write or like them. But apparently I must be doing something right because they keep getting published.
Okay. Marina?
Hi, I'm Marina Fontaine. I have two dystopian works published. One is a novel and one is a novella. Part of it is from personal experience growing up in the Soviet Union. Part of it, a big part of it, obviously is made up, or it wouldn't be fiction.
Okay. And I'm Rich Groller. I'm also an author, but I haven't written about totalitarian societies. However, I am a retired military officer, and I've spent 40 years supporting the intelligence community, so I have a lot of knowledge in this. And on a personal note, my grandfather escaped from Siberia after 4 years as a slave laborer there. So I sort of have a personal interest in totalitarianism and being against it. So without further ado, let's sort of set the stage and define some terms. So authoritarianism basically is a political philosophy where the state controls the means of production and controls most aspects of people's lives. What differentiates a normal authoritarian state is that the authoritarian state doesn't get into all the greater details of a person's life. Totalitarianist ideology is much more controlling. And basically, there's three things that separate an authoritarian state from a totalitarian state. And the three things that separate the totalitarian state is the totalitarian ideology itself, the fact that they've got a secret police to reinforce things, and monopoly control of mass industry. So we set that as the level of the playing field. So do you guys disagree with any of that?
There are shadings saying that the state controls means of production. Well, yes, if they control everything else in society, but they might not control it directly. So, you can go down that rabbit hole. Basically, my idea of a totalitarian state is when the state takes an unhealthy interest in everything you do, potentially do, can even think of doing, and the individual is depreciated in favor of the collective, and the collective is the state, the society, the whatever. So yes, totalitarian by definition means that they get into everything. I have bets on that. They try to get into everything.
Basically social life, economy, education, art, science, private life, and morals. Those are the full. That's the full spectrum that the totalitarian state tries to control.
Yes.
Whereas in a straight authoritarian state, not all of those degrees. There are some degrees of liberty. Maybe religious, cultural. If you're in a monarchy of some sort, they look to allow some freedoms, and that way the state at least gets some loyalty from some of its folks, even though it's still authoritarian. Any other comments on that?
Well, I think you can have totalitarianism, not just because government is controlling it, but because society is controlling it.
Yeah.
It's done through public shaming. It is done through things that you are not allowed to say, and it doesn't have to be government enforcing it. No. It can be private parties.
I think what separates authoritarianism from totalitarianism is that an authoritarian ruler is only interested in keeping power and will do sometimes horrible things to stay in power. Totalitarianism is about, the reason they want to control everything is because nominally they're doing it for your own good. And that's why they come after every aspect of your life, not just something that can potentially overthrow the government.
Okay. All right. So I guess we sort of set the stage there for what we're talking about. So let's get into the literature aspect of this then. So then what tropes are necessary to graphically represent what a totalitarian state is? I mean, and what are the essential elements you need to start with first? Sarah?
To create it in a book?
Yes.
It's much easier to create it in a book than in real life, because you can have your character run up against things, and I have often said 1984 would never have worked in real life. Yes, it was an exaggeration, and we've had interesting discussions on my blog about this, about how narrow a view we're getting. It's very easy to create what seems like an absolutely undefeatable, super efficient totalitarian state on paper, because you just show the state always winning and the individual always losing, and the state controls everything, or, whatever cabal you're dealing with. I don't actually like doing that, because it's like writing those romances where people fall in love at first sight. And at one point, someone was reading a romance near me and asked me if I felt electrical shocks when I fell in love, and I'm going, no, that's a sign you're having a stroke, not falling in love. With totalitarianism, it's kind of the same, because what you have to remember about totalitarianism is that it can destroy without creating, and it can make it impossible to be free without actually managing to have full control. In fact, the more encroaching and minute and exact the state gets, the less control it has around the edges. Because it depends. If you have a totalitarian state over a village, you can do anything. if it's over a small country, you're going to have more control than over a really large and diverse country. And if it's a worldwide totalitarian state, you pretty much have to assume the people at the top know nothing. So what I did, what I prefer to do is show where it starts cracking up. I like giving people a map of where to hit, so they sort of recognize it if they see it forming. And that's what I did in Dark Ship Thieves, which, theoretically they control everything, they think they control everything, but there's widening cracks the further off you get from the center. Something to remember, and this is important when we're dealing with input from, I swear lately I've spent half my time on MeWe telling people, yes, China says it can do that. That's nice. When you're dealing with a totalitarian state, not only do they lie to you and lie on purpose, but the leaders themselves might have no idea what's happening, because you're not going to be the one to report to the great leader that, yeah, you have 3 million shoes, but they're all baby shoes for the left foot. You're not going to say that. You're going to say, yeah, we have 3 million shoes, the production is up. So,
Okay.
I attack things from kind of the other end rather than a God's eye view of society. I go the other way. I view it from the individual and what their everyday lives are like. And so if I was to set out to write this kind of story, that's kind of where I would start. And I think that the hardest thing about writing this kind of story is getting Americans to believe what that kind of society does to you as a person.
Oh,
because because Pretending to Sleep was something that I wrote for a workshop, and the instructions were to write something that the character was passionate about, and not to hurt the little children and fuzzy animals. And I sat down, and that story came out, and I wrote it in one day. I was at the computer for about 9 hours, and when my husband came home, he thought somebody had died because I was bawling my eyes out. And I was actually quite stunned that it was bought, given who was buying it at the time. And the number one critique that I got back from the editorial panel that was buying this was that the character was too passive. So apparently they wanted this 10-year-old girl who had been thrown into prison to somehow strangle the guards with her ponytail ribbons and fight her way out and form a resistance and kill Ceausescu in his sleep. Because Americans just could not believe that somebody would be, quote unquote, that passive about it. What they want is an adventure. What they want is a hero. And that was the number one thing. And then the part of the editorial panel that had lived through the Cold War, interestingly enough, they got it. And they were the ones that said, no, this is absolutely realistic. This is what communism did to people. So I think you have to walk this fine line as a writer between making your characters realistic and making them relatable.
You agree. I'm an old Cold Warrior myself, so I understand that.
It only hurts when I laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, Marina, you have anything to say on this?
Yes, I'm kind of in between what has been said before, because my stories do focus on the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost cheat in a way because I tell everything through the characters. I don't world build. I just take characters from different walks of life within the society. And I show what it's like to live in a large city where pretty much everything is controlled, what it's like to be a prison guard where there's a torture going on, and the decisions that you have to make if you're not yourself a monster. what it's like to live on the outskirts, what it's like to get in trouble and know that the government can't help you. Where do you go? Who is really running things behind the scenes? Because as Sarah says, the rulers only rule over their domain, top level. They can't know everything that's going on. So where do you go when you need something? When you need medicine and it's not available? When you come across some bad actors and you can't tell anyone because the bad actor belongs to the government. So this is how I show the world, and I also show the decisions that people make on an individual level and how eventually some of them get pulled into the revolution. I call it the rebellion rather than the revolution, because revolution, to my mind, is more destructive. And they don't look to destroy it, they just look to improve their lives in the beginning, and then it kind of snowballs.
Cool. Sarah, did you have another comment? You look. You might have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always have comments. I have less comments. They don't often mean much. I was actually what Monalisa said is absolutely the strongest thing, and there are many Americans that know this precisely. And you don't need to be in a totalitarian society to be double thinking and to let other people inside your head to the point you can't think straight. One of the most common comments on my blog, and honestly, it would have been mine 10 years ago, or 15, I think I came out of the political closet around then, is if people I work with, if my wife, if whatever, knew that I'm reading your blog and what I'm saying in the comments, I would be divorced, fired, canceled. Just a long list of horrors. And I know people in that position. And some of my closest friends are in professions that have been so thoroughly taken over. And more, by the way, this is all professions, including STEM, that have been taken over by people who allow only one thought, and you have to agree in all minute details, that they feel they can't say anything. The next stage is you have to agree, which was the stage that sent me screaming out of the political closet, because all I ever wanted to do was sit down, tell my little stories. Yes, some of them involve politics in the same sense that some of them involve cats, but that wasn't a necessary thing. I have a ton of stories, and if it weren't for the fact that I found myself in a field where to publish anywhere but paying, I was being, I had to sing in the choir. I couldn't simply say, yeah, let's not talk politics. Let's go elsewhere. But I had to agree on every minute detail, and the minute details started to include things like you're friends with him, so you're thinking wrong, which, by the way, is something that I experienced under real totalitarianism, where you had to put people in Coventry because they were in bad odor. And if you associated with them, you were going to be investigated. So once it got to that point, I had seen the movie before and I couldn't take it. And I still feel guilty because I couldn't take it for various reasons. But there are people who are still caught in that position, possibly a majority of professional people. And it's one thing to say, well, you don't need to bring politics into work. No, you don't. But when everything you do is being interpreted through a certain lens, politics are already there. What's happening is they're getting inside your head. And you're being silenced and you're being taught you have absolutely no power to do anything. And I think a lot of people, even people watching this, are going, oh yeah, if my colleagues knew what I really think about X. And these are not big important things, you know? They can be things like I will not eat bugs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is enough to trigger people to think, you want to destroy me. And it just goes crazy from there.
So how do you present that when you're writing?
Distributed. Part of the reason that totalitarianism tends to be presented, well, and the fact that until recently we had to go through what a friend of mine, half jokingly, because she works for one of the giants, calls the mass industrial entertainment information complex. It wasn't going to let a lot of that stuff through. But part of the reason we present totalitarianism usually as from the government and not from all the tendrils that spread out is that it's easier, it's conventional, it's much harder. And now, of course, I'll have to do it. Thank you, Rich, for bringing it up. But it's much harder to portray it at the level of, I don't know how to put this, push-pull, because the people around you are enforcing this because they too are afraid. And it just propagates to the roots that way. And that's why I said totalitarianism can destroy the power to be free without being able to aggregate to themselves the power they think they want, which is part of the reason it keeps creeping too, because it's like, so we got everyone agreeing with us, but there's still resistance. I don't understand this. Let's make it more explicit. And it just keeps going.
Right. Yeah. And language is a big part of that too. I mean, the whole totality of propaganda and recreating language and double speak, that they talked about in 1984. I mean, is it necessary to create a language to convey that when you're crafting a story, or not?
Is it necessary to create propaganda or special terms?
To create I guess the language of double speak, so that the audience understands the dichotomies. You know, it's like the old saying.
Well, I think that
Russians used to say, "Izvestia не правда, правда не известия." You know, the two magazine, Truth and the News. And what that means is there's no news in the truth, and there's no truth in the news. It's old Russian joke basically, but you understand what I'm getting at there.
Yep.
So. I guess is that a necessary element to be in the story, or can you convey it without having to get that explicit?
I think that if you want to put tension in any story, not just one about totalitarian societies, is to get inside of a character's head and stay there, and then show what they're thinking versus what they're acting. And eventually you will be able to convey what the accepted political speech of the day is. So you don't necessarily need to call it propaganda even, but there will be phrases that people will be able to exchange with each other, kind of like a secret handshake, so that we know you're one of us, kind of thing. I mean, I think that's part of world building, to be honest.
Yep.
I'll put in a caveat. It is possible to write double think and double speak words that mean something else to the writer or the character, and in that world, as with dialect and foreign words, they should be dropped in sparingly. It takes very little to give people the impression of what it is, but you don't want it to be really hard for your reader to figure out what you're actually saying. As I think all of us are ESL, right? English as second language.
Yes.
I find it very hard.
Third.
You have no, well, mine's 32, but you have no idea how long it took me to figure out Heinlein dropped Purty in a novel. And it was one of the first novels I read in English. I searched high and low. I went through dictionaries. I had no clue. Partly because I didn't hear the sound yet when I read. Eventually I lived in the South and I remember the day it was like, oh, that's what that means. It's just regional for pretty, but it can cause a big barrier. And if it's something that you're creating in your head, what seems like a very logical association to you might not be to other people. And if you're writing entire sentences in Newspeak, make sure they're sentences people don't need to fully understand, because people will be going, what? So a word here and there, double think, just little double plus and good. They've ported into the language because they're isolated words, not.
Well, in A Clockwork Orange, there is the whole new language that you kind of figure out as you go. But it's more of it's also a dystopia, but it's a literary work. I actually played with the idea in my novella, The Product, that the society is so far gone in banning certain things that the word itself is illegal, and you can get in trouble just for saying the word. And some people there's almost like an underground trade in certain words. Like if someone wants to know, is there a word for real marriage, not what the state calls marriage at this point? What is it? So that is a big part of it. And I want to follow up on something like how do you make it realistic in the characters' heads? I think the biggest thing that happens, especially picking up on what Sarah said, where everybody just stays silent because the government propaganda has infiltrated everybody's heads, and it's become the default. So it's no longer politics; it's just the default state of things. Everybody knows, kind of thing. So what you do, and it is something I definitely do a lot of in my novel, is you have to find out whom you can trust and how you go about doing that. And at some point it becomes more, do I come out to my coworkers? And at some point you have to decide, is it safe to fall in love with this person? If I'm not out to this person and I fall in love and they find out who I am, what's going to happen to me? And I actually have characters in my novella who both have been burned before by falling in love with the wrong person, and they don't know if they can love again. So it does happen at the tail end when the society starts cracking up. There are whole swaths of people that you can find, that you can trust and interact with, and who would cover for you, no questions asked. And it's the opposite of what John Ringer called general trust society. It's not a family trust society, it's more like a in-group trust. And you trust those people literally with your life. We've had neighbors who sometimes would ask my mother to hide the package. Don't ask what's in the package. And she would do it because she trusts the neighbor trusts her. But
So
it takes a while to work out.
Yes. One of the things that you're talking about, knowing which words to use, one of the things I remember from learning Russian was that there were two words for we have enough. We have enough to share, and we have enough not to share. We have enough just for ourselves. In English, we don't have anything like that.
there are a lot of expressions that are curiously missing. Like, I don't know if Romanian has a word for privacy, but a single word for privacy doesn't exist in Russian. At least I was talking to my mom, like, what would the word be? And she would start using several words to describe it, but it's not one word. It's like they've never needed it.
This kind of little detail is the kind of stuff that you can put into this kind of story to show the reader just how much scarcity rules that society, because you have to have a way of communicating that we have enough for ourselves, so don't worry about us, or we have enough to share.
Yes. And you don't say we have enough to share to someone you don't trust.
That's right.
Because that's another thing. Because why do you have more than you need?
And we're kind of seeing kind of a similar evolution here on social media. If you as soon as they start flagging certain words with fact checks, people start coming up with little ways of getting around it.
Yes.
So that everybody on
beautiful to see in real time.
Yes. So yeah, it can happen here.
Okay. Another question on viewpoint. What do you think is the most compelling viewpoint? The viewpoint of the oppressor or the viewpoint of the oppressed?
Depends on the writer. Depends on what you're trying to do with the story. That's kind of like asking how long should the story be. The only way I could write the POV of the oppressor would be as it was falling apart, not because I'm virtuous, but because I consider, okay, about 25 years ago, my husband got me one of those play at being Roman Emperor games. I played it for about 3 days, and then I said, this is too much work. Even just controlling what turns out to be NPCs and their programmed reactions. I can be in charge of a project, particularly a small project that absolutely needs to be done. It's not that I don't have a natural attraction to power, I don't have patience for it. So I would have serious trouble writing someone who is really motivated by wanting to keep control of everything and everyone and wants to keep growing the power. I can write it as things start hitting the fan and he's going, oh boy, I never had as much power as I thought I had, and he's trying to plug up the holes before they come to kill him. I can write that. I really can't write. It's not how my mind works. So it depends on the writer, it depends on the story you want to tell. The impact will be entirely on what the writer puts into it.
Okay. Any other?
I think that you need to write it from whoever has the most at stake. So whoever you pick to be that viewpoint character is going to determine the kind of story that you tell. So if you tell it from the point of view of the oppressor, of the Stasi informant or the Karen, it's going to be a very different story because what is at stake for them is going to change. For the oppressor, it's getting control, maintaining control, and expanding control. And I think you'll be very hard pressed to write that in a sympathetic way, but there's going to be a certain audience who's just going to love that. Just like there's going to be a certain audience that is going to relate far more with the oppressed.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have the skill to write the oppressor, but yes, if someone can do it, it will work very well.
It's very compelling, but I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Marina.
I said it can become compelling. Compelling doesn't mean pleasant to read or pleasant to write. Some people complain that like Chasing Freedom doesn't really have a big bad because it was concentrating on people who work for the oppressive society. But from inside their heads, they're mostly doing their jobs, and inside their heads, they're doing good for the country, and they're actually being nicer than they have to be. So that's how they sleep at night. But then eventually it does, when you get deep inside that head, you realize, I realized as I was writing that it's cracking up even inside those heads, because everybody at some point does become honest with themselves, even if it's just waking up and looking in the mirror. I firmly believe that when you are alone with yourself and with your thoughts, at some point the rationalization will be stripped away and you will realize what you're doing. That said, those are not heads I enjoy being in, whether as a reader or as a writer. I wrote one truly horrible person in my novella, and I needed those parts because I wanted to show one truly horrible person just to prove to myself I could do it. But I couldn't wait to get those parts done with, honestly.
Yeah,
But
I would say
compelling, yeah, it could be compelling.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just from global literature, for the oppressed side of the house. I mean, anything from Solzhenitsyn is, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, or Cancer Ward, or Gulag Archipelago. Those are all tremendous global works that show the viewpoint of the oppressed. So, I mean, do you have any works that you would recommend for people to read to help them write better along those lines? I mean, off the top of my head, when I read Machiavelli's The Prince, I mean, that's a blueprint on how to be a dictator. So, it might give some hints. But is there anything that you would recommend as reading?
The Road Serfdom. I part of my issue is that the good ones are incredibly depressing, and I can't read them once and not pick up again. I very much would like to recommend the Black Book of Communism if you want to know how things tend to work out. Even when some of the people involved think they're doing the best thing possible. I can't remember if it is The God That Failed but I'd recommend that. I'm fairly sure that's the title. I am not sure about the author because my head's made of cheese before coffee. It's amazing. I often forget. I have never forgotten my own name, but I have forgotten the names of books I've written, the names of my characters, and I routinely forget my family members' names. So, so I don't know.
Monalisa?
The Lives of Others. The Lives of Others, it's a movie.
Yes.
And it's one of those that I can't watch. But it is excellent if you are trying to figure out how to write this kind of story. And as a writer, I think that any experience that you have had in your life that evoked a lot of emotion in you can be retasked to whatever you need it to. You don't need to live in a totalitarian society to actually be able to write about it. If you are a human being, there was some point at your life where you were stomped on. And if you can figure out how to write something that will evoke the same emotions in the reader that they evoke in you, that's really all you need. You don't need to do a lot of historical research if you don't want to, if that's not the focus of your story. If the focus of your story is how it affects the individual, you're not doing tactics and politics and whatever. You're doing how this one person's life has been ruined. Then you don't need to go and become a history major.
One of the things that one of the things that keeps being brought up in my circles, and my circles are fairly unusual, is this illusion of, oh, pre-agriculture, we had a perfect society. Now, they don't think it was communitarian, but they imposed their own. It's like pre-agriculture, everyone was free, and no. Some of the worst, on what Monalisa was saying, some of the worst dictatorships will be within families. And where, if you know any family where you have an elderly unmarried daughter, and I don't know, that's not as much a thing in America, it's huge in Portugal. An elderly unmarried daughter who never had a life because her role from the moment she was born was to look after the parents when they were old. That's a dictatorship. And sometimes people don't even know they ever could want something else. And so, when you're going back far enough in time you're actually almost by definition going to find dictatorial tribes and bands because they were defending themselves against other tribes and bands, and they needed a strong leader at their head to make sure they were cohesive enough to do so, which is where I think, evolutionarily speaking, we have a tendency to look for the man on the white horse. It's precisely because way back we spent tens of thousands of years needing a strong leader to defend us from those people over the ridge because they want to come over and eat us. And they probably did, to be fair. So that's where both the totalitarian temptation of I need to defend my tribe and make it exactly what I want it to be, and the tendency to look, well, but he's a strong leader and he'll look after us. And then totalitarianism devolves from that in the state situation.
I don't think people realize just how rare freedom is, because there are so many ways to be oppressed, and only one way to be free. And sometimes the only freedom you find is within yourself, which is like another story. There have been prisoners who were more free than the guards because they still held on to something inside them that the guards have lost. It's not an unusual story of individuals who were reminiscent about something like the Soviet Union. Lives of Others is a fantastic movie. If you want something light that's loosely based on real events, is Death of Stalin, just to show the ridiculousness of the setup of this society. And I checked with my parents for some of the facts, and they said a lot of the facts actually were true. I mean, it was played up for laughs. Have any of you seen the movie? No. Yeah, I do recommend it just because it's this horrible stuff going in the background and everybody's terrified. And at the same time, it's really funny because it's ridiculous. The whole setup is ridiculous. So sometimes it's good to kind of poke fun of it, just to show that, not that you shouldn't be scared of it, but sometimes you can tell more truth by mocking it. So I think that is a valuable to watch.
It's always interesting to me what people consider oppression, whether it's how high it is on Maslow's scale. Some people, it's oppression because they're not allowed to grow their own food, or what they grew is taken away from them. Yet in first world societies, oppression is things like not being allowed who you want to marry, or other themes of self-actualization. And I think one of my favorite examples is from this play, this German play called Elizabeth das Musikal, and it's about the Emperor Franz Joseph's Elizabeth. And she has this great, wonderful song about I only belong to myself, because she's rebelling against his family, against the expectations that as empress, she's going to have to produce children, and she's expected to produce an heir. For her, that's oppression. And even though that was the standard formula for what was expected of you in life back then, modern audiences just eat it up as if it's the most important thing in life. So I think it says a lot about a society where how they define oppression, where on Maslow's scale they go. And it's very interesting to me that what first world societies consider, to be tyranny. It's being told that, you have to, you can't be yourself, you can't be selfish, you can't do what you want, you must somehow meet familial expectations. And I don't even know if that's something that modern Americans understand anymore, because we don't have those kind of pressures.
Yeah.
Do we?
We do.
We do.
And we put.
I mean, you'll ask a child if you take away their phone for an hour.
There is a difference between putting yourself. How do I put this? There is a difference between acceding. I actually see the Empress's point of view, because there is a difference between acceding to a contract. If you marry, you're not going to always have your own way, or if you are, it's going to be a miserable marriage. So you meet somewhere halfway. If you have kids, you know that you have taken on some obligations for them. While if you're born to a role, which to an extent the nobility of the past was, they were born to a role, they didn't have a choice. And I can see that reading as oppression. Now, is it the same as being condemned to starve because someone takes all your food away? No, it's not. Completely different scales. However, it is still, you're being pushed into a certain role. In Dark Ship Thieves, Athena feels oppressed and acts out because she has a certain role, she thinks. I mean, when she actually finds out what's going on, it's completely different. But she thinks she is oppressed because certain things, she has her life pre-planned for her. And she doesn't even notice that there are people who are soft, because the personal is always more important. So yeah, I understand the Empress. It makes us giggle, but I understand it. Part of the reason we didn't see so many self-actualization stuff in the past or in totalitarian societies, partly because totalitarian societies tend to wreck the economy with a mallet. So they, like past societies, are living really close to the bone. When you're living really close to the bone, I want or don't want to have children, or I want or don't want to get married to this person. It all recedes because there is the I want to survive, which is the imperative. Which, by the way, is a great way to write a character, because if they're so busy surviving, it's very gripping, and you can slip in all sorts of things along the way.
I think this is why a lot of the time people always complain in these dystopias, it's always the teenagers who become heroes, or at least very young people. And it's probably because the parents are too busy surviving, in addition to having been beaten down by life, but part of it is also they are just busy day to day trying to not get in trouble if they themselves have not been brainwashed, and trying to put food on the table, and possibly even going along in the ways that they don't want to, again, to feed those teenagers, which is why it's important, if you are, God forbid, ever caught in that society, it's important that you let your children know from an early age what is going on. Like, I grew up with my parents listening to Voice of America since I was 9 years old. I would sneak into my father's room, listen, and I figured out that from this little radio comes the truth. And I listened to them talk as well. So that's how I learned, and I'm very thankful that I was exposed to that from an early age, and I was not brainwashed pretty much ever. When some of my friends were, some of my friends were saying, it was better during Stalin because we knew better what to do. It was more structured, not the tail end of it that we caught growing up in the late 70s and 80s. And I couldn't fathom that because I already knew better.
Rich, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Sarah. The question I was asking is: are there any tropes that should be avoided when you're writing this particular type of literature? Like is the concept of the fearless leader too trite to be written, or things like that?
At this point, tropes are tools. We have such a rich fiction tradition that whether you hit or avoid something depends on what you're trying to do. Is the concept of the fearless leader to be avoided? Well, no. Not even in the sense that they have some worship among the ranks. But how you do it, if you really go over the top, you'd better be playing for comedy, because especially if you're writing from a cog in the totalitarian regime, and they keep talking about how much they worship love and want to wash Big Brother's socks, it's going to be comedy if you exaggerate it to that point, or we're going to want to reach through the Kindle screen and strangle the character. So it's whatever you want the reader's reaction to be.
I'm trying to think of it off limit. Because I think it all depends on how you pull it off. I can tell you that there's certain things that I don't like. To see oh yeah, I was the murderer all along, and I forgot to tell you that for the last 500 pages. Oh yeah, I'm going to totally pick up another book of yours again. Sure.
Unless
never. But other than that,
unless they come up with a good reason.
What's a good reason, Sarah? What's a good reason?
People might have been lying to themselves all. And I know the book you're referencing, and it's funny once. But you can do that in the sense that people did, especially if you're dealing with doublethink, they did something that was so utterly despicable in their own eyes that without amnesia or weird tricks, they're just not thinking about it. They blocked that off. That wasn't me. That was the cat. He took the cookies out of the oven. Sorry, that's what my older son tried to make me believe, and he absolutely believed it when he was 3. It's there. The cookie trays were out of the oven, which scared the heck out of me, because imagine a 3-year-old pulling a big cookie tray out. They were on top of the stove. There were crumbs all over the floor. There were crumbs on his face, but it was the cat who did it. Not him, the cat. So, and adults can do that type of thing. They can hysterically deny something they did. And that could be very powerful. I can see that. But you have to play fair with the reader. There have to be hints along the way that this is what's happening. So that the revelation, the reader, instead of going, what? goes,
Mhm.
oh, now that makes sense. That scene that I couldn't make sense of.
Yeah, like
Um,
if you reread it and then you say, oh yeah, I should have seen that. Kind of like a good mystery.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It works like a
hard to
mystery.
do.
In fact, a lot of I use mystery because I write mysteries too. I use mystery techniques for a lot of things. And I don't remember who told me that. I think it was Jerry Purnell. I sent him a scene to read and I said, is this one the nose? And he said, no, you need to do a dance in front of it. You need to have something to pull attention away from it until it becomes important and you remind the. So, you come into a room and someone has blood on their hands, but you mention it very quickly and then look over there. Those people are fighting. And the narrative follows that. So until you come back to the blood on someone's hands. I mean, if you want to hang a flag on it, you have your character think, oh, okay, the blood on their hands is because they were taking care of the cat that was wounded, or something stupid like that, and you just go on.
Okay. We got less than 4 minutes to go. I'd like to wrap it up here. Let each you have a chance to promote your works and talk about yourself some more. Marina, we'll start with you.
Okay, my works right now can be found at silverempire.org. Both of my books have been republished there, so you can head on there, and they have a virtual storefront set up as well. The ebooks are also available on Amazon. As far as any last words, I wanted to say, actually, since we brought up the tropes, one thing I try to avoid in my work, and count this as a plug for it, is I avoid the one hero does everything trope. Because when you really do have a real rebellion and a real revolution, it's a long process. It takes a lot of people and a good organization before anything gets done. So if you're trying to do it realistically, this is part of it, and this is very much what I'm trying to do, to show the community of how it is done.
Okay. Monalisa?
My work can be found on Amazon and Kobo and at Barnes and Noble. So pretty much anywhere where books are sold. I have the totalitarian dystopian one I have up is called Pretending to Sleep, and it's available. Like I said, it's available everywhere. It is a short story, so I do want everybody to understand before they get into it. It's a short story. It's not a full novel. I also have another short story coming out in World Breakers called The Good of the Many. And you can imagine what somebody like me would have to say about something called The Good of the Many. And it kind of touches on these totalitarian themes. It has three teenagers as the main protagonist is one of the teenagers. But it kind of goes along the lines of what we talked about, totalitarianism and what it is to be free and what it is to be oppressed.
Cool. Very good. Sarah?
Right now, I'm trying very hard to be 3 people at once. And I just realized, and I was doing some searching, but I didn't get it, that I forgot to send the covers. So I'm doing scripts for the new Barbarella comics. You can imagine what becomes of something like that in my hands. So it's great fun. It's actually amazing fun because I get to see what the artist does with the images in my head. And the artist is great. And now that I know we can handle it, the scripts are going to have these lush and strange backgrounds. But I'm doing that. I'm trying to reissue the Dark Ship Thieves books because I am continuing the series. Next up with Dark Ship Defiance and Hacking the Storm, which is Fuse's story. Those of you who read the series know exactly what I mean. because in the last book he was sort of starting to recover due to various things. And so being in his head is kind of interesting. And I'm finishing Ball of Red for the Shifter series. And meanwhile, which is the cover I did send in, there is, I don't even know what to call this, because it's not, this is a series, but the series is within an entire universe, which I call Schrodinger worlds. And while there are totalitarian worlds among those, most of them, how do I put this? There isn't control over the entire universe, because by its very concept, it's completely, it's so large and so different, you can't control it. But anyway.
Yeah, we're over time, so.
Sorry. Okay.
Thank you all for
thank
coming
you
to the
so
panel, and
Thank you for having
enjoy
us.
the rest of your LibertyCon.
Thank you.